Have you ever been afraid of something that hasn't even happened yet? The phone call, the rejection, the diagnosis, the failure, the conversation that could completely change everything. Nothing has happened, but somehow you're already living through it in your mind. And that's the strange thing about fear. Fear doesn't need a real problem to control you. It only needs an uncertain future. But here's what I want you to see today. Fear usually controls you in two ways. First, it convinces you that you need to know exactly what's going to happen. Second, it convinces you that you need to control the outcome. And if you don't recognize those two things, fear can quietly start making your decisions for you. But Scripture gives us another way. You don't have to know what happens next to take the next faithful step. So let's look at the two lies fear tells you and the biblical response to each one. The first lie: you need to know what happens next. Think about Abraham. God told him to leave his country and go to a place God would show him. Notice what God didn't give him: a complete map. Abraham had to move before he knew the entire destination. And that's one of the hardest things about faith. We want God to show us the entire road. We want the destination. We want the timeline. We want to know what happens after the next step and the step after that. But often, God gives us enough light for the next step, not the entire road. And fear hates that, because uncertainty feels dangerous when you're afraid. So maybe you're waiting for certainty about a relationship, a job, a decision, your future, and you're asking God, what happens if I do this? But maybe the better question is, what is the faithful thing I already know to do? Because you don't need tomorrow's instructions to obey God today. You need today's grace. The second lie: you need to control what happens next. The moment certainty disappears, fear reaches for control. Control the conversation, control people's opinions, control the outcome, control every possible variable. And when you can't, you panic. Fear makes uncertainty feel like an emergency. It tells you that if you can just think hard enough, plan enough, check enough, prepare enough, and predict enough, you can finally make yourself safe. But you were never designed to carry that much control. Think about how exhausting that is. Trying to control what people think of you. Trying to control whether someone stays. Trying to control whether an opportunity works out. Trying to control your future. Trying to control something that hasn't even happened yet. And eventually, you're carrying a weight God never asked you to carry. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 6, "Do not worry about tomorrow." Not because tomorrow doesn't matter, but because tomorrow belongs to God. You have today. You have this moment. You have the next decision. You have the next faithful step. But you do not have tomorrow in your hands. And that's where Philippians chapter 4 gives us something incredibly practical. It says, "In every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your request to God." Notice the pattern. When fear shows up, don't hide it. Don't pretend you're not afraid. Don't let the fear become a private conversation that only happens inside your head. Bring it to God. And that's where we can turn this into 3 simple steps. Step 1, name it. In every situation, don't just say, "I'm anxious." Ask yourself, what exactly am I afraid will happen? Maybe you're afraid you'll lose your job. Maybe you're afraid someone will reject you. Maybe you're afraid you'll make the wrong decision. Maybe you're afraid that the future won't look anything like you hoped. Name it. Bring the actual fear before God. God, this is what I'm afraid of. You don't have to clean it up before you pray. You don't have to sound strong. You can tell God the truth. Step 2, do your part. Philippians says, by prayer and petition. Prayer isn't an excuse for passivity. Ask yourself, what faithful action is actually mine to take? Maybe it's making the phone call, having the conversation, applying for the job, apologizing, saying no, taking the next step. Whatever obedience looks like in this moment, do that. You don't have to control the outcome. You have to be faithful with what God has placed in your hands. Your responsibility is obedience. God's responsibility is the outcome. Step 3, release the outcome. This may be the hardest one, because you can pray and still try to control everything afterward. You can say, "God, I trust you," and then spend the next 6 hours worrying about whether He will answer the way you want. But Philippians says to bring your request to God with thanksgiving. That's trust. You are saying, "God, I'm asking you for this. I want this. I'm bringing this to you. But I surrender the outcome to you." And then Philippians chapter 4 verse 7 gives us the result, the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding. Notice what it doesn't promise. It doesn't promise that you'll immediately get an explanation. It doesn't promise that the outcome will be exactly what you wanted. It promises something different. The peace of God can guard you while the situation is still unresolved. That's important, because sometimes we think, I'll have peace when I know everything is going to be okay. But biblical peace doesn't always come from knowing the outcome. Sometimes peace comes from knowing who holds the outcome, the emotional turn. And maybe that's what you need to hear today. Maybe you've been waiting to feel brave before you move. But courage isn't the absence of fear. It's refusing to let fear make the decision. You can be afraid and still obey. You can be uncertain and still take the next faithful step. You don't need to know what tomorrow holds. You need to trust the one who already holds it. So name what you're afraid of. Do what faithfulness requires, and release the outcome to God. Your responsibility is obedience. God's responsibility is the outcome. Maybe the road ahead is still unclear. Maybe you don't know how everything will work out. Maybe you can't see the next chapter yet. That's okay. You don't need the entire road illuminated. You need enough light for the next step. So breathe, pray, take the next faithful step, and leave tomorrow in God's hands. Because whatever tomorrow holds, God will already be there.